Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be reviewing the fourth series of Better Call Saul, and then discussing what makes a good prequel. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I have been reading the novelisation of the comic Giant Days. The book is written by Noam Pratt, and the original comic is written by John Allison with art by Max Sarin, and they're both quite good. The comic is one of the big hits of the time, somewhat unusually for a relatively successful modern comic, I guess. It's not really genre fiction, or at least it's not really crime, sci-fi, horror, fantasy. It is very much slice-of-life YA stuff, which does usually do okay in the sort of YA graphic novel market, but doesn't always catch on in the same way that Giant Days has in the sort of monthly periodical sold in comic shops market. So it's nice to see, we're finally getting a bit more material out there. But yeah, it's about 3 young women going to university in Sheffield, which is another reason it's slightly surprising it's done so well in the American-dominated monthly comics market, because it's set in the UK, it's pretty British. The art is maybe slightly sort of manga-inflected cartooning, so I guess it has a bit of sort of more universal appeal, but still, yeah, it's a very sort of quirky, funny, gentle, young adult coming-of-age comedy, which is just brilliantly characterised and hilarious, and the novel is, although it is one of those adaptations that kind of just makes you want to go and read the original, that's pretty fun as well. Yeah, sort of quirky, young adult comedy translates pretty well to the young adult novel genre, and Noam Pratt is an experienced young adult author, so yeah. That's my general recommendation this week, really. The Giant Days Media Empire. My girlfriend Julianne Bedford, who has appeared on the podcast a few times, is currently consuming Giant Days. I think last night she went to bed slightly late because she stayed up reading about 12 issues in a row. It's dangerously addictive stuff.
Wow, that is quite addictive. Do you know why this has been such a breakout success? Is it something to do with people really like the characters or the writing?
It is really good, yes, that does help. The publisher who put it out have been doing some more sort of cute, broad appeal stuff with artists often taken from the webcomic community. They had Lumberjanes with Noelle Stevenson, who I think is well known for the graphic novel Nimona. But no, I'm not sure why this comic about 3 students at Sheffield University has become so particularly popular. I mean, a lot of the people I follow on Twitter to talk about comics are British, so it is possible that it's slightly disproportionately successful among British people. And maybe if you asked an American comic fan, it would be less of a smash hit, but it does seem to do pretty well.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, maybe it's one of those things that can't necessarily be easily explained. It's just captured the sort of the zeitgeist or the moment, or, it's captured people's imagination. Or the fact that it's different.
It is definitely different to what you get in most mainstream comics, yeah. And there is a vague movement towards maybe we should have some comics about people who aren't all white or aren't all men. So there's an extent to which it's probably coming on that, yeah.
Also, so this is the novelisation you've been reading.
Yes.
So how is it different when translated from comic to novel? I mean, what does the novel bring to it that the comic didn't have?
Well, the comic doesn't have, internal first-person narration or anything. The comic is entirely just their actions and dialogue, and maybe the occasional thought bubble, but mostly it's just external stuff. So the actually getting it right into their heads is kind of different, I suppose. Giant Days is it's very much about real people having real experiences, but it's quite silly and cartoony at times. There are people breaking into stuff, and in the novel they meet a cult. Yeah, it's all very much grounded in a recognisable experience, especially if, like me, you went to a British university. But there's something slightly over the top about it. There's lots of shouting and fighting and people doing incredibly stupid, weird, or over-the-top things. And I think a lot of it is geared towards producing a funny, visual image, making this people going to university storyline visually cartoonishly interesting. And the thing with the novel is, although it does capture that spirit, and there is some weird stuff, like I say, a cult. I did sort of come away thinking, well, do you know what would really complete this experience? Some drawings by Max Sarin.
Yeah, so maybe people should start with the original comic to get the full experience.
It's definitely a nice Easter egg. It's definitely a nice bit more. And as I say, Noam Pratt knows what she's doing. It is a very nice, touching story. It does have both the silliness and the sort of emotional undercurrents to make you go, "Aw," at the end. But at the same time, I think kind of maybe inevitably with these sort of adaptations of a work, it is one of these adaptations that makes you want to go back and read the original. But, I get that a lot anyway. I come out of most superhero films thinking, right, I think now I want to go and read some comics about whoever that was. Anyway, Alistair, what have you been consuming?
Well, I went to see the latest Spike Lee joint, Black Klansman. Yeah, which is it's good. Is the my one word summary. Yeah, it's obviously interesting pitch for a film. As soon as I saw the trailer, I was like, well, that is ambitious pitch, and it's one of those stories that's so crazy it can only be based on a true story about how Colorado's first African-American detective was able to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan through a combination of mainly speaking to people on the phone a lot and then having a different cop impersonating him when he needed to meet Klan members in person. It's directed by Spike Lee, who is a very well-established American independent filmmaker. He's made some great movies like Do the Right Thing, which is a favourite of mine. There's Summer of Sam. Most of his films are sort of like about and sort of set in New York, although obviously this one's set in Colorado.
Obviously I've not seen many, possibly any of them, because they are films, but I have heard of Spike Lee. I do know he's a big director.
He's very good, yeah. And obviously he's, especially a lot of his earlier work, directly address issues of sort of race relations in America, like Do the Right Thing, especially is very much about racial tension in Brooklyn. In the moment that America's having right now, you know, the sort of resurgence of white nationalism, sort of racists feeling pretty emboldened by the election of Trump. It seems to be that, like, this has encouraged Spike Lee to go back to his, to what he does best, which is making kind of angry films about race relations in America. And this is very much, a project that works really well for him. It's directly addressing issues of sort of white nationalism and, white power and the Klan. There's various bits like when Klan members start shouting like, America first and things like that. And there's a bit when two characters talking and one of them says how David Duke, who's the leader of the Ku Klux Klan in the film, he was a real person, how he's sort of going through this process of trying to make sort of white power politics more palatable to the average voter. And then basically there's a bit when someone says, one day that they'll get someone in the White House who can talk like this, and then they're like there'll never be a president of the United States who embraces this kind of rhetoric. I mean, it's obviously done with a wink,
nudge, wink to audience. Know what we mean, lads? Know who we're talking about?
There's quite a lot of that in the film.
Did they use the phrase "Make America Great Again" at any point?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a bit like I think they don't quite use it, but there's a bit where one of the Klan members is like, we want to make America great, like it used to be, or something like that.
I see what they did there.
Yeah, they do adapt quite a lot of Trump-isms, like America first being like another one. So yeah, it's quite on the nose, but I don't mean that as a criticism. I think it has a point to make, and it makes it very, very strongly, and it's a powerful and effective point.
Well, yeah, it does sound like it might be the sort of film that does naturally go straight for the nose.
And also it's trying to make its message accessible to a mainstream audience. I mean, it's a film that's been sold as a sort of... The posters are very much making it seem like this is a sort of darkly comic buddy cop sort of film. The way it's been sold is more like, this is sort of entertaining. And obviously but it does have this powerful political message to it. Especially with the end of the film, which is the end of the film is really, really good, and the denouement, and I won't say anything about it here, but it does kind of tie everything together really, like all the themes and stuff really well in like a really powerful knockout punch with the last bit.
A couple of reviews I've read or watched have implied that this is a film with some kind of big gut punch or twist or something ending, but I've so far resisted the temptation to go and look up what it is.
Yeah, well, I think it's not like there's a twist, there's some reversal of the plot, like a lot of classic twists, but there is
It turns out the Klan are really dead.
But there is a really, really striking ending, and it's one of those things. If you read about it, you probably oh, that seems a bit odd. Whereas you have to see it, I think, for it to have its impact.
You never know, I might.
In terms of just also being an entertaining film, I mean, it is good to watch. They're kind of aiming for what actually quite a few films have done this year, notably I, Tonya and Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is to have dark, difficult subject matter, in this case, racism, in the other films, domestic abuse and bereavement. So really dark, difficult subject matter, but also some kind of comedy bits to a film, but try to balance the tone so that the darkness doesn't subtract from the kind of the funnier bits and the funny bits don't detract from the darker bits. It does it well. I think it's not quite as sort of funny as say I, Tonya can be or Three Billboards when it is, but the undercover sort of cop plot is really, really good and really tense, and it does have this great kind of political undertone, so I think it does really work well as a film.
Yeah, the trailers I've seen didn't really sell it as a funny film. Whereas I, Tonya and Three Billboards, they did very much have the dark comedy vibe, whereas this looked like it was a if it was anything other than a sort of a political allegory or a political message, it was a reasonably straight pop
Well,
film.
the comedy sort of hinges on a sort of sense of dramatic irony, that you're aware that these clan people are, the man they're talking to is like a fictional construct created by an African American, and they're being completely hoodwinked by it. I don't think it's trying to be as straight up funny as, like, say, I, Tonya was in certain moments. Although they do actually share a cast member. The idiot sidekick in I, Tonya plays an idiot Klansman in Black Klansman. So that guy is doing well playing like drunken American idiots.
Well, find your niche and lean into it, I suppose.
Yeah, he's a character part. But yeah, it's worth seeing.
Okay, and for our main review type bits this fortnight, we will be talking about Better Call Saul Season 4. This is a bit of a moderate fantasy violence favourite. We've covered it a few times before. It is, of course, the prequel to Breaking Bad, covering the corrupt lawyer character Saul Goodman, or rather, covering how the bumbling, slightly morally flexible, but kind of well-meaning lawyer Jimmy McGill slowly became the wheelie-dealer, corrupt Saul Goodman character from Breaking Bad. And yes, we're in Season 4. We may need to mention what happened at the end of Season 3, so if you're not at least up to date to the point of having seen the end of Season 3, in which, and I'm going to go ahead and spoil it right now, so there we go. Jimmy's long-running rivalry with his brother Chuck came to a head when Jimmy managed to force Chuck to retire from his job by disclosing an illness he had to his insurance company, and Chuck, incredibly depressed by his brother's betrayal and the state it left his life in, basically killed himself by kicking a burning lantern off a shelf in his house, which is pretty depressing stuff, and that's basically where Series 4 picks up and pretty much runs from there. We've seen the first 3 episodes of this 4th season. Alistair, what did you think?
I'm enjoying it so far. I think we decided that this was our favourite show of last year when we did our end-of-year roundup. And I think it's very much continuing. I think it was probably my favourite or second favourite show last year, maybe only beaten by Legion.
I was going to say, I really thought our favourite show was Legion.
I think you might actually, you're probably right now that you said that.
That does sound like the sort of thing we'd vote as our joint favourite. But anyway, Better Call Saul.
I really like the sort of slow, subtle tension that the show has. Breaking Bad, obviously, was brilliant with its kind of big, explosive set-piece scenes. Breaking Bad was like a roller coaster, and it really was quite intense. And I do like how they've got a very different tone for Better Call Saul. How it moves quite slowly, and it's very focused on the kind of characters slowly revealing themselves. And by this 4th series, we've got a really, really strong understanding of who these characters are, which really helps us kind of dive into the nuance of their actions. So when characters behave in an emotionally closed or withdrawn way, which can make for bad TV because it's not like a novel, we're not seeing what the characters are thinking, so it's kind of difficult to convey that visually. But because we know these characters so well, we really understand where they're coming from and what they're doing. But what I do also like about this 4th season is the tension is kind of ramping up. There's a definite escalation. I mean, I don't want to say too much, but there's like a quite intense and sort of surprising murder scene in an early episode. There's also clearly like rising tension between Saul and his girlfriend Kim, and also a general tension between Saul's desire to be on the straight and narrow and his sort of subconscious want to, break the rules and kind of live this carefree, morally flexible lifestyle. So there's certainly a lot of increasing tension, and this series we're getting quite a lot of Gus, major character from Breaking Bad, and the more Gus is in it, the more the tension goes up. The slow burn is kind of finally reaching a boil.
Yeah, I think the longer the show goes on, inevitably, as also happened with Breaking Bad, but it's happening a bit slower here, the more we're sort of moving from this family legal drama to the sort of drug cartel crime stuff, slowly, not quite taking over the show, but sort of crawling into more and more of it. Like, at this point, except for the scenes between Saul and Kim, basically most of his show is about crime. And there was a period in Season 2 where Better Call Saul did appear to be a major premium drama that was mostly about lawyers and office politics. But at this stage, a lot of that seems to have kind of died with Chuck, to be honest. I'm curious how much it'll move into that, or whether we are, at this point, on a bit of a fast track to this becoming a show about crime, as Jimmy McGill, later Saul's life, becomes more and more orientated around that world, because I guess that's where he feels he belongs. He doesn't seem very comfortable in his old life around lawyers, and probably most troublingly going forward around his, as you say, his girlfriend Kim anymore. He seems to be struggling a bit to feel happy with that.
Yeah, you're right. there's definitely a sense of that he's losing or becoming disillusioned with the kind of straight up legal world. He feels the call of a life of crime, something like that, in the sense that he gets involved quite early on with a sort of low stakes burglary for no seeming reason other than the fact that it's not the sense that he needs the money. He's just spotted an easy, lucrative crime, and basically Saul is incapable of passing the opportunity up.
I don't know, but there's a bit in the second episode, I think, where he's offered a job and basically with some nice seeming people who run a copier company, and he sort of angrily turns it down because I did listen to the podcast that the writers do about this show. So yeah, what they're basically saying with that scene, I think, which probably you can probably just get from watching it, he feels bad about himself in the aftermath of what happened to his brother, and he sort of can't not resent and look down on people who would actually hire someone like him. It's a sort of, some intense self-loathing coming from Jimmy McGill at this stage after what happened to his brother, and there's I don't know, that might be what propels him through into crime, I suppose, because in the first 3 seasons he did project a certain charm, a certain desire to maybe better himself is the wrong word, but I don't know, but to, try and push food at stuff, but I don't know, it feels like he might be slumping into it a bit.
I think this goes back to what I was saying about how we know the characters very, very well at this point, 3 series in, and it's become very clear that very much everything in Saul's life is sort of shaped by his relationship with his brother and his sort of attempts to win his brother's approval, and the element that in the first few series he's trying to be a good lawyer like his brother is, to kind of win his brother's respect that way, and obviously by the end of series 3 it doesn't work. His brother says that he doesn't really care about him in a sort of quite, emotionally cold, but sort of also kind of nonplussed kind of way, and then dies shortly afterwards. So at this point, I think Saul's thinking he never is going to be able to win his brother's respect. But maybe instead of winning his brother's respect, he'll become the thing that his brother always hated about him, which is that he was the combination of a lawyer but morally flexible. Because the Chuck character is very much, I'm an upstanding pillar of society, a man of great virtue.
That was very much self-image, wasn't it? Though Chuck was actually a bit of a petty, venal, bitter person in his own way. He clearly kind of resented Jimmy for being the fun one.
Yeah, no, exactly, yeah. But he views himself as this, this kind of great noble figure, and has this huge kind of believes in the importance of the law and the figure of the lawyer as a sort of defender of truth and freedom and things like that. He's got obviously a very high opinion of himself, which is obviously subverted by how he can be quite petty. And what he dislikes is obviously before Saul was a lawyer, he was a sort of short order con man, and again just doing sort of small cons, and that what he really dislikes about Saul is the idea that a con man plus lawyer together is an anathema to everything that Chuck believes, because he believes in the lawyers being these great defenders of people and noble profession, and the concept of con man plus lawyer is something that he really can't stand. And when he looks at Saul trying to be a lawyer, he just sees a con man being a lawyer, and Saul's constantly trying to prove to Chuck that he's not a con man lawyer, he's a straight up regular decent lawyer. He tries to go into elder law because he wants to look after and protect vulnerable old people, which is a noble thing, but Chuck just doesn't respect that. So maybe at this point I'm thinking that Saul is kind of well, I can't win my brother's respect, so maybe I'll become that thing he always thought I was, which is a sort of shystery con man lawyer, which is obviously, we know that's kind of what he ends up being.
I think that's probably kind of where they're going, yeah. Whether we'll get there at the end of this season or sometime next, I don't know. At the moment I think he's kind of spiralling. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up falling in with, logically it would be Gus, I guess, and having to do some law work for him to pay off some debt or something. I don't know. We'll have to see where they go with it. I think there seems to have been a bit of a turn in the consciousness in the last couple of seasons. I feel like for the first couple of years, this show was kind of seen as a bit of a fun extra for hardcore Breaking Bad fans. I think I may have slightly glibly described it as a DVD extra during one of our early reviews. And it's only in the last, season 3 to now type era, is it as good in its own right? Or could it even be better? Type talk has started. There was particularly an episode last year, the sort of courtroom episode, I think it was titled Chicanery, where Jimmy and Chuck went up against each other in court and in a bit of a sort of dirty tricks fight, which was the one where everyone started going, oh my god, this is amazing. Yeah,
I think you're right. It's kind of become, to borrow a phrase from you, premium telly in its own right.
It's always been premium telly. It's always been very much using the tropes and standards of that sort of slow, character-driven thing.
Yeah, or maybe Zeitgeist TV then. Or I saw an expression that's used by Simon Andrews, who's a tech writer, and sort of marketing writer who we've mentioned before on the podcast, and he talks about the importance of must-watch TV, like having on your platforms shows that have captured the zeitgeist. And Breaking Bad obviously was a must-watch. Yeah, Better Call Saul, I think, has become, as you say, over the last few series, this has really like emerged from Breaking Bad's shadow to become must-watch TV. This is partly because they've deliberately adopted this very different tone for Better Call Saul to avoid, I think, comparison to Breaking Bad, how it's slower. It's much more about the sort of slow character drama rather than big action pieces. In terms of tone and characterization, it's much more similar to like Mad Men than Breaking Bad. And I think it's because of this different approach, and also because it's deliberately gone for a slow nature, it's taken longer to build. Like the second series of Breaking Bad is pretty action-packed. But it's taken longer to build, so it's taken a while to get to this point because it does move slowly, but they clearly were like, they've got to this point now, and it's obviously really, really good to watch.
Well, yeah, and as we said before, this show loves a good process montage, even more than Breaking Bad did. There's lots of long bits showing exactly how someone does someone, often Mike. They're a particularly good eye for a good Mike process montage, showing how he, does something violent or tricksy in a very business-like fashion. And so, yeah, that seems to be very much part of their vernacular. And Jimmy is, although he can be, an opportunistic criminal, he's more of a likeable guy than Walter White was. Yeah, Walter White was kind of set up to be this, this, I guess, relatable, middle-class, middle-aged guy doing these things because to look after his family, but it sort of became clear quite quickly that he just liked it. That, he was actually, in some ways, a kind of Chuck McGill-esque way, very resentful and uptight about how his life just hadn't turned out the way he wanted. And when he was given the chance to break bad and become a big, respected drug kingpin, he enjoyed it far too much. Yeah, there's a bit in Breaking Bad, spoilers for, I think, somewhere in Season 2 or late Season 2 or early Season 3 of Breaking Bad, where the cancer goes into remission. Walter White is cured, or at least no longer actively dying. And obviously, that's the point where he could have gone, right, well, I guess I no longer have to have this double life as a drug kingpin. And he does not stop being a drug kingpin. So, and at that point, although he's still kind of relatable in a normal man trying to be a drug kingpin, vaguely comedy way, that is a big point where you have to kind of lose a lot of sympathy for him. And, you have to conclude he does just like being shit to people to make himself feel big. And we haven't yet had that moment with Saul. I assume maybe we eventually will. I sort of suspect the moment where he finally fucks up his relationship with Kim, is going to either be very much like that or just very sad.
I think you're right, that the big moment will be, when he kind of has to choose between Kim and the life of crime. I seem to remember, there's a bit that really stuck in my mind. I think it's in the second series of Better Call Saul, when Saul, there's the running plot with the guy who collects baseball cards and his involvement with Mike. There's a bit when Saul gets the baseball card guy, basically gets him out of legal trouble through an elaborate ruse involving convincing them that there was this fetish video about people sitting on pies. I mean, it can't be explained, but it is a very funny episode. And at the end, Saul and Kim are eating the leftover pies. And then Kim basically says at one point, you did sort of fake evidence, by creating this video. And Saul is kind of but, I got the guy off, so what does it matter? And there's this moment when you can tell Kim's it's one of those brilliant, really subtle moments that the show does very, very well. But you can just tell that Kim's well, I'm not happy about this, but I'm not going to say anything because it's a one-time thing. And then after that, everything kind of goes back to normal between them. But you can tell she's even though she may be not quite as grandiose as Chuck is about how, important and noble a lawyer is, you can tell she probably isn't too comfortable with shystery, lawyery stuff. And you can feel that throughout this series, that kind of life tugging on Saul. So, they were definitely heading, I think, to what's going to be a big moment, which is the decision. I think Kim's basically going to say, at some point, you have to be, a straight lawyer, not a crooked one.
Well, but he's on a year's suspension. Is that the plot? He can't be a lawyer for a year?
He was suspended during the last series. I'm not sure how much time is supposed to have elapsed or how far through the suspension he is. But he is looking for a job, so that implies that he's trying to find some source of income for the immediate future.
But I was just wondering whether the point of crunch will be when he gets to the end of his suspension and has to become a straight lawyer again, and just doesn't. But maybe that's too obvious. I don't know. They may well want to try and bring things to a head in a more dramatic way. But I don't know. Possibly a good moment to mention the Kim character played by Ray Seahorn, who's pretty great. Partly because they've made sure to give her a lot of cool process montages showing what a incredibly determined lawyer she is, you do kind of respect her quite a lot as someone who is doing her best in her own way. And unlike Saul and the other two male leads in this show, to be honest, Nacho and Mike, unlike Saul, Nacho and Mike doesn't just turn to crime.
Yeah.
There's something respectful at the fact she's just, ploughing ahead and getting on with life and just being incredibly bullish about it. Obviously, that comes back to haunt her a bit at the end of Series 3 when she works so hard she has a car crash. But, there is something very, very admirable about Kim, and presumably the less admirable Jimmy becomes, the more that becomes a problem.
Yeah, I do agree with you that Ray Seahorn does an amazing performance and really elevates this part from what could have been just the girlfriend stroke sort of moral conscience for Saul to actually like a sort of three-dimensional character. And as I mentioned, she does do a lot of really like subtle acting. And I do like, she's a really great character, how you see she's sort of striving to be successful, and in some ways like everything's going right for her, but something's also going wrong, in the sense that it goes to show that like success isn't just about willing success. Life's a bit more complicated than that. And you can see in this series how she also seems somewhat distracted from kind of achieving the goals that you're sort of quote unquote supposed to want to achieve, like career success, money, status. She seems sort of almost like distracted by that, in the sense that since she's had an accident, she's starting to rethink her life. You can see that sort of subtly in the way the character's portrayed.
Well, yeah, and again, they give her this slightly wicked sense of fun, but she does enjoy messing around with Jimmy, and they've even done a few sort of gentle cons on people together, just for fun. Not for huge amounts of money, if I remember, but I think she does have a similar sense of fun to him. She just also has this sense of, the need to actually be professional at professional times, which, as I say, I imagine will clash with him at some point. And the Nacho storyline as well, I think is... In the past, I have found those bits to be kind of, but I quite like them this season. I don't know why, possibly because they've gotten incredibly dramatic, and that seems to be where all the violence is coming from. But yeah, Nacho's storyline has sort of grown and expanded and become more captivating to me as the show's gone on.
I really like Nacho as a character. I think I think he's very good. I think similar to how Rhys Seahorn plays Kim, how Michael Mando plays Nacho is a big part of the character. He could have been a sort of generic Mexican cartel figure, and he doesn't go for this kind of like huge, like over the top, like angry, shouty, violent performance like like Tuco does, or the sort of like simmering kind of explosive aggression that the Hector Salamanca character has, or Gus has. But I think Michael Mondo does a really good job again of making this seem like a real person, how he's not just a gangster, he's got a moral conscience, he's working hard to keep his dad as far away from the crime as possible. And clearly the fact that his dad, similar to the relationship between Kim and Saul, or where we may be going with Kim and Saul, the fact that Nacho's dad disapproves of his involvement in crime clearly weighs quite heavily on him, and he wants his dad's sort of like approval and doesn't like that he's disappointed him. I do think the character is really good and sort of going in some interesting directions. I think Michael Mondeo is a really good actor who has done lots of great work with quite sort of small parts, or like parts that could have been very, very stereotypical. Like he was the main villain in the video game Far Cry 3. And again, the character could have just been a bit of a sort of drug dealer gangster, but through his performance, he managed to elevate it to a sort of interesting, and captivating character. I think he's going to be the villain in the next Spider-Man. Is it Spider-Man Far From Home?
He'll probably be in it somewhere. I think they've also got Jake Gyllenhaal in to play some kind of villain as well. Who knows?
Yeah. I think he's supposed to be playing the Scorpion at one point in a Marvel Spider-Man film.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's a good actor, and I'm really glad that he's got like a really like meaty part that requires like a lot of like range and subtle acting, because it really shows that he is a very, very talented actor, which I think people have known for a while, but he needed something really to like show off.
Well, yeah, I think Nacho's story is, meant to have at least some parallels with, Saul and Mike, again, these three characters who are sort of teetering between their civilian lives and crime, sort of slightly unwilling to go all the way and become, like, gangsters or criminal lawyers, but also unable to seemingly quite leave it alone.
It's the standard Breaking Bad plotline. It's the Descent plotline.
It is, but I think, I don't know, they're slightly more relatable than Walter White was. I would do the whole bit again, but Walter White was a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
And these three guys, although they clearly have flaws, sort of greed or a desire for excitement, I don't think they're twats in the same way that Walter White clearly was.
No.
Although the Mike storyline, I like Jonathan Banks, I like Mike, I enjoy his sort of gruff, business-like manner and process montages. It's not a storyline I give that much of a shit about. It's not a very emotionally investing storyline. It's just kind of there.
I assume it's building towards something. I'm not exactly sure what. It may be some kind of conflict involving his relationship with his dead son's wife, his daughter-in-law. I think they're building to something, I think, there, though at this point I'm actually not quite sure what.
Well, yeah, it's just the other two storylines are clearly building to a bit of a crescendo, Building in a slow Better Call Saul way that means the crescendo will probably come in about 5 or 7 episodes. But still, whereas it seems quite visible in contrast that the Mike storyline is not building to that kind of crescendo quite yet. It's just he's been to some offices.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've had a lot of Saul, Kim, Gus and Nacho drama, I suppose. Maybe they're crowding out the Mike story to a bit. And maybe he'll get more time in like a future episode.
Yeah, I guess. Because of the way they write this show, they don't actually get that many scenes per episode in their 40 to 45 minute episodes. So I guess maybe they are saving the Mike material. But yeah, I found the Mike scenes a bit weirdly inert compared to other scenes. In the most recent episode, they brought back a character from Breaking Bad, who I wasn't expecting to see in this show, in a way that felt really weird and offhand. I assume they're going somewhere with it. I hope they are, because otherwise it just felt like a bit of a wanky Easter egg.
Is this the organizer woman? I've forgotten her name.
No, I meant Gail.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have no idea where they're going with that, but I assume there's a point. I mean, one thing I have noticed with the show is as it's gone along, they've been introducing more and more Breaking Bad characters. I mean, in this one, they've got the twin silent assassins have appeared quite a lot in this series, and obviously Gus is in it more. And as much as it's nice to see the Breaking Bad characters, I mainly watch Better Call Saul for the Better Call Saul characters. I don't want Gus to come in and take over the show. I want a show that's about Saul and Kim and Nacho and Mike, kind of its characters. I don't necessarily want Breaking Bad to kind of come in and take it over.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what slightly bothered me about that Gale scene. It's just, I mean, I'm assuming the way that he wants to be more involved is going to pay paid off in some way, but I don't know. But it felt like a scene that felt like it should be going somewhere, but also could just be an Easter egg. I'm hoping it isn't just an Easter egg, because that's kind of annoying.
Yeah. Well, I think they're sort of building up the Gus character and how he gets involved with producing crystal meth inside America rather than bringing it over from Mexico. I think is where they're going with that and linking the Gale character in because he's obviously, he can make crystal meth. But yeah, I don't know where they're going with that, but it's more of a... It's related to kind of the emerging Gus plotline, which is not that I don't like Gus as a character, and it's not that I don't think the story will work or lack tension. It's just I don't as I said before, I just don't want this to become swamped by Breaking Bad characters or a powerful need to show exactly how the pieces moved into the positions they were at the beginning of Breaking Bad. That's not why I'm watching this show. Why I'm watching the show is to see the sort of interpersonal drama between Saul and Kim or Nacho and his family and crime buddies. That's kind of the core of the show for me, and I don't want them to lose that.
Yes, I agree. That's basically what I was going to say. But yeah, though these are niggles and meanders, and as you might be able to tell from the fact that we've talked solidly and enthusiastically for quite a while, I think we mostly quite like this show.
Yeah.
This is definitely one of the better things that is on.
Yeah, certainly. I'd say probably, like as I said last year, the best things on TV this year will probably be Legion, number 1, Better Call Saul, number 2, especially there's no Game of Thrones this year. So, maybe there'll be something else that comes along and really surprises us.
I'm still hoping for some good new shows at some point. Have I seen any good new shows this year? I don't know, actually. It's been kind of barren. Oh well, there's still time. Anyway, yes, Better Call Saul, though. At least that's still good. Okay, our follow-up question thing. What makes a good prequel? And is the answer Better Call Saul and not the Star Wars prequels? Well, let's find out. Alistair, what is it?
Well, my main point, which I think I might have mentioned on the podcast before, is one that I got from the film and games critic Nathan Dighton from the podcast he does with his wife called The Mispronounced Item, which is that the problem with prequels is that they can be a fundamental lack of tension in the story. For example, in the Star Wars prequel, there's a kid called Anakin. I wonder what's going to happen to him. Or in the Lord of the Rings prequels, there's a character called Gollum with a precious ring. I wonder what's going to happen to him. I mean, it kind of fundamentally lacks tension because baked into the premise is the ending and you know what's going to happen. So the way to get around this, I think, is to basically introduce the sort of sense of mystery and tension through like a self-contained story, which Better Call Saul does really well. So Saul has a brother. Oh, he's not in Breaking Bad, so I wonder what happens to him. Or, Saul has a girlfriend. She's not in Breaking Bad. I wonder what happens to her. Or Nacho, well, he's not in Breaking Bad at all, so I wonder what happens to him. So yeah, that does create a sense of tension, and those are the things I'm watching the show to find out the answers to.
Did we basically answer this question with our final points about Better Call Saul?
Yeah, pretty much, I guess.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, yeah. Yeah, that's a nice segue, a backward segue.
A segue to what, everyone going home. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, the Star Wars prequels are the most famous failed prequels. I did, in the name of research, I opened up the Wikipedia list of prequels page.
Oh, so did I.
It was not inspiring reading, fucking was it?
No.
Like, there's almost nothing on this list that I cared enough to watch or liked if I watched it.
Yeah, there's also a lot of things that are like called like parts 2, 3s and 4s that are actually sequels. Most crazy, Bambi 2, which is a prequel. I don't know what on earth that was about.
Yeah, and a lot of straight-to-video Disney films, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, lots of before films. Or Hannibal Rising. All these things which, I don't know, the thing is, if you describe that to me in broad outlines, it's like, okay, how does this random kid become a cannibal? I guess that's on some level interesting, but I mean, the problem with prequels in a lot of ways seems to be that by the time you get to the stage of making a prequel, you're basically just going, oh god, how can we milk the thing for money? And you're clearly going to just hack it out.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lack of, outside of the Breaking Bad people who seem very willing to put in the work and actually, think about it and do some serious legwork in making us care about shit, there seems to be a degree of, well, look, here's the thing. Look, the thing's happened. Oh, has it? Who'd have known? I mean, because the stuff you said about, the lack of tension, that is true. But it's also a really obvious, written right there in enormous letters on the fucking side of the box, point that anyone should know when they sit down to write a prequel. Surely, if you're a writer of any vague intelligence and you sit down to write a prequel because, I don't know, you want to or you have to, the first thing you should go is, right, everyone knows what happens at the end. How can I make this journey interesting?
Yeah.
And the fact that so many of them don't try or don't bother or fail so totally is mostly, I think, signs that they just don't give a shit.
Yeah, or the prequels are just a cash cow, cash in. That was the tautology or something. Cash cow, cash in. Yeah, and
do you cash in a cash cow by just shoving it through a mincer? Is that what happens?
I guess so, yeah. Probably need a metal
okay.
detector, a sort of magnet to extract the cash, and then you get beef burgers.
And then break your teeth.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so, and obviously, I think the option of is nothing good comes from this process. So, which is why,
Which brings us back to prequels.
Yeah, which is why there's a lot of bad prequels. Well, I went through the Wikipedia list, and I sort of broadly tried to, classify the prequels, from the list, but of the ones I've seen, into sort of various groups, because I was trying to get to the bottom of a question, which is...
Of the list, so you could stop.
Which took much longer than I expected. And it was like, do they really need to make, 6, American Tail films, or however many there were? I don't know. I was trying to get to the bottom of a question, which is, okay, as I said, right, the Star Wars films lack tension because it's Anakin's story and we know how it ends, right? But also the Star Wars films are bad because they're bad, right? They're badly acted and they're badly written and there's, too much, special effects and not enough, character development. Or, another one, which I looked at, which was, Alien Covenant, right? Alien Covenant has problems for being a prequel, but it's also just, it's just bad. It's just not a great film. So what I was trying to get to the bottom is, once you subtract the kind of films that are bad because they're made badly, what is the kind of the essence of the prequel flaw? You see, other than just things that are just always bad, like bad writing, lazy characterization, sort of empty plots. I kind of found they kind of got some sort of different clusters of prequels. There seems to be a large group that kind of boil down to, which basically can be described as, this film is how the premise was made. And these are the ones that sort of, lack tension, because the whole point of the story seems to be making something that we already know how it ends. So the Planet of the Apes prequels, for example, it's all just describing how the world fell and became controlled by apes.
Are those the recent ones?
Yeah, there's 3 of them.
Aren't they meant to be good?
The ones I've seen I enjoyed, but I do think there is a fundamental sort of, they do have a problem with the lack of tension, and where they're good, it's because they're good like Breaking Bad, like telling stories.
Well, I mean, that's it, isn't it? I mean, Better Call Saul, I may not know exactly how he's going to become evil lawyer Saul Goodman, but I'm pretty sure that's where they're going. The fact that it's good is related to the fact that it's actually well written.
But there's also there's lots of other stories being told, I think, other than just the story of how Jimmy McGill becomes Saul Goodman. There's much more stories in Breaking Bad, and stories that I'm in some ways more invested in than just that.
No, I haven't seen this monkey film, so it's hard to tell, really.
Yeah. Another one I thought was an interesting example of a film that does how the premise was made, which is the Twin Peaks film, Fire Walk With Me, which in some way does lack tension because the whole first and second series of Twin Peaks, and to the degree the third series is really about anything, is basically a very detailed excavation of one event, the murder. And Fire Walk With Me shows you how the murder went down, which we've seen in detail before and described through the TV show, so there isn't really much tension there. It is an interesting film because it's got the interesting David Lynch sort of style, which I find very watchable, but I wouldn't say it's a film that has tension. And also I think some of the most interesting bits of Fire Walk With Me is all the stuff before they get to Twin Peaks with the previous murders and the bits with David Bowie and turning up. So all that stuff I think is more interesting actually than the kind of Twin Peaks stuff in Fire Walk With Me because of this kind of fundamental lack of tension if your whole film is basically arranging the premise for something we've already seen.
Well, yeah, I think Fire Walk With Me is a fairly stellar example of, yes, the plot is obvious, but obviously it gets carried through on the quality of the actual writing. Whereas, conversely, the most recent Star Wars prequel, Solo, was a film which all the outcomes were obvious and the writing didn't really carry it through, for me at least. I think you liked it slightly more than me, but I found it a bit dull.
Yeah.
As you say, a lot of the how the premise was made stuff is how you get to some quite boring prequel action. I mean, I went to see Alien Covenant with you for this podcast, and there was a long sequence in the middle where the Michael Fassbender character explained how the aliens came to be, or at least a substantial chunk of how the aliens came to be.
Yeah.
And it's just a bit sort of, who is this for? I don't understand. I mean, Michael Fassbender has a certain gravitas, but all you're doing is explaining how aliens exist. Whose life is enhanced by knowing this? It certainly doesn't make this film better.
No, exactly.
It just becomes Easter eggs. I mean, it's the sort of thing that might have been interesting, or at least kind of intriguing as a 2-minute flashback, but then you put it in as a whole film and you just want to cry.
Yeah. And actually, I quite disliked it because also I think it kind of cracked on the basic premise of the original Alien movie, which was so elegantly simple that I disliked how they added complexity to it. The basic premise of Alien is you wander out into space and you stumble over something that's really nasty out there. And I just love the beautiful simplicity of that. And I didn't want, to actually it was people who created the nasty thing inadvertently, and it's like actually our own hubris or whatever coming back to haunt us. And I was like, stop overcomplicating simple, effective storytelling.
Well, yeah, it's the sort of thing that fans might find interesting, or fans might buy a tie-in novel for, but I think even they get a bit sort of, is this what I wanted in the actual films?
Yeah.
Is this a good use of the millions of dollars? Could they have spent those millions of dollars making just an effective horror film instead?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I watched 2 seasons of the Batman's prequel show Gotham, which is just endless characters turning up and slowly revealing how they became recognisable Batman villains. And Batman doesn't yet exist, and they haven't got the money to do a proper superhero fight. So really, it's just dudes getting different types of guns or gases, and then having shootouts with the GCPD.
Doesn't sound brilliant.
It's not great, no. And everything is punishingly slow and boring, and yeah. I occasionally hear whispers that it might have improved in the 3 years since I stopped watching it, but I'm not watching more of that. Sorry.
Doing a TV show that's basically the origin story of lots and lots of characters over and over does sound like it could get pretty tedious after a while.
Not to lead into my stereotype box, but yeah, the DC Warner Brothers strategy of making TV shows about DC characters before they were interesting does seem slightly baffling to me. They've just started a show called Krypton about Krypton before the Superman stuff happened.
Oh, right.
The bit in Man of Steel was boring enough, to be honest. Apparently they're making a show about Alfred before he met Bruce Wayne.
Okay.
So...
yeah, this seems...
British Butler, the show, okay.
Yeah. It's actually going to be like a sort of drawing room drama that's all about kind of... and a comedy of manners or something like that. There won't be any superheroes at all.
If it's basically a Cluedo show, I would be more up for it. But I suspect it's going to be some sort of tedious action drama where it turns out he was in the Secret Service or something.
Yeah.
So In summation, yeah. But yeah, that is where you get to the point where you're just desperately fishing it to death. And also, again, it's clearly there's clearly a degree of we have to do this because strategy demands we do this. We need to do something cheap. How do we do something cheap? Set it before the expensive things happened. So it's just people sitting around. Correct.
I mean, the kind of how the dynamic was established can also be like a problem for like origin films, things like that. That when we're watching the Andrew Garfield like Amazing Spider-Man, we're like, well, I know what's going to happen in this film is that he's going to go through a process of being bitten by a radioactive spider, having some coming of age things, learn some life lessons about great power and great responsibility, and ultimately become Spider-Man. That's one of the reasons why the Spider-Man Far From Home was quite good, because we're like, right, we'll just skip over that because, people have seen it so many times that there's no tension left to be extracted from it.
Well, yeah, I thought it was pretty much received wisdom at this point that pilot episodes and origin films are both quite hard to make interesting, and generally most TV shows get a lot better once they've moved past the damn setup. So the desire to make bigger and longer pilot episodes and origin films is strange to me, because I really thought we'd already decided they were kind of rubbish.
Yeah. The other main type of prequel that I sort of found through the course of my research, and which the kind of Prometheus and Alien Covenant fall into, is ones that basically exist to sort of expand the universe and reveal, more about the story. So Prometheus and Alien Covenant kind of, expand the story of the Alien universe by, filling in what the deal with like the Star Jockey is and things like that. But obviously, like, those films were A, bad, and B, I don't think the Alien universe didn't need expanding in that way. I prefer more stories that maybe took place after Alien 4 or Alien Resurrection, rather than just throwing in prequels to expand the universe. But another example of this, which is a film I actually did enjoy when I saw it, is The Fantastic Beasts.
Well, yeah, it's not great, although it's not an amazing film, and obviously it has Johnny Depp in it, which is a bit of a deal breaker for a lot of people, but it was alright. It was a fun film in that universe, even if it clearly isn't going to be, the next Harry Potter.
Yeah. It did do a good job of like broadening out and expanding the Wizarding universe, which I quite like. My main criticism is I think other than casting Johnny Depp was probably like a mistake on several levels. But also I think that the sort of 4 or so, however many films they're going to make with like Jude Law and Johnny Depp as like Dumbledore and Grindelwald, I think they will ultimately suffer from the same problem of lack of tension, which is we know what's going to happen. Like, Dumbledore will triumph over Grindelwald, and there'll probably be some kind of vague setup-y stuff with Harry Potter's parents involved at some point. So, and probably people who know Harry Potter much better than I do probably even know in more detail about what's going to go down. So how they're going to make this tense or interesting, I don't know. Maybe they're deciding like, well, we're just going to pitch this at a mainstream like cinema audience who maybe don't know Harry Potter that well but kind of want to see a magical fighty film. Maybe that's their plan. Or maybe they will find some interesting way to write it, so that there is like a real sense of dramatic tension over what's going to happen, even though we ultimately know. Well,
yeah, it's felt very throwaway, Fantastic Beasts. So although I kind of liked that and found it a bit refreshing against the crushing portentousness of a lot of blockbusters.
Yeah.
The fact that Fantastic Beasts was actually just kind of light and kind of fun did actually work for me. But partly that means there's not that many characters I'm that bothered about. So I imagine they're going to, as the series goes on and they feel they have to become more portentous, because again, that's what you do apparently, they're going to lean harder and harder on, as you say, Harry Potter characters, filling out the Harry Potter mythology, giving us those riveting hot details of Dumbledore's private life before he became old and inert or something.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think they can't escape this kind of basic trap, even if maybe there is a way out for them, but I can't really see what it is. Even if they make good films, they have, like interesting characters and like well written and things like that.
I'm curious. I think the potential's there for them to actually go in a new direction and do new and interesting things. I don't know. I'm just kind of always waiting for them to trip up and just make a boring mythology film which exists just to explain old shit from Harry Potter, which isn't really of interest to me because I'm not a hardcore enough fan, and isn't of a huge amount of interest to hardcore fans because they've probably read it on Pottermore anyway.
Yeah.
And seeing a huge, heavily animated version doesn't really add much to their lives.
There seems to be, within the Harry Potter community, when I speak to people, a sort of a general dislike of the degree to which people desire to tinker with the canon. I think partly this is because there's probably enormous amounts of kind of fan-created content that kind of fills out the Harry Potter universe in a sort of better and more interesting way than J.K. Rowling and other people's official additions, I'm doing air quotes again, audio medium, official additions to the canon. So I think there's a general annoyance with these unnecessary additional variants because there's more than enough fan content that fills out the universe that's better.
Yeah, I mean, it has slightly dipped my respect for J.K. Rowling as an artiste, simply because, I kind of thought it was good the way she'd done her 7 books, and then, and they were going to make some films of them as well, but fair enough. And then buggered off to do, her detective books and her weird book about Little Britain or whatever it was. And apparently, inevitably, we have to go back to the media machine. I don't know if it's one of these things where if she didn't do it, someone else would have done it anyway, so she decided to do it, or something like that. Maybe we'll find that out one day, but it's weird. Yeah, ultimately what makes a good prequel seems to be just the same as what makes a good everything else. It's just that prequels have to deal with the added bonus of a lack of tension, which just makes it harder. I mean, the things for the good prequels, like Fire Walk With Me or Better Call Saul, are really good, which possibly just kind of implies that it just takes a really good writer to make a half-decent prequel.
Yeah, but I think it's more of a challenge is what we've got out there. It's harder to write a good prequel. It's probably easier to write a good sequel or a good kind of original piece. I think you're taking on a challenge by deciding to write a prequel that either a lot of writers fail to appreciate that challenge or just don't engage with it because, like I say, they're cashing in the cash cow or whatever.
I mean, occasionally you get a weird one, like the Star Wars prequels, the main prequel trilogy, are kind of interesting because you get the feeling it was kind of a passion project for George Lucas.
Yeah.
There's a lot of effort in there. I don't think I can accuse George Lucas of sitting down and hacking it out for cash.
No, because he didn't need the money.
I'll give him that. They're still not very good, but I don't think they were hacked out, and I think one of the reasons why they continue to attract maybe a bit more interest and chatter and analysis than other hacked out prequels is that, they are clearly someone who wants to do this with passion for the project, who feels like he has something to add, sitting down and still writing a terrible trilogy of prequel movies.
Yeah, one of the problems with the prequels is also George Lucas had way more control over them than he did of the original trilogy. I think George Lucas only directed Star Wars A New Hope. He didn't direct the other two, and they were more collaborative processes, whereas the prequel trilogy is very much a passion project because it's so much more controlled by Lucas himself, which also goes to show that Lucas isn't a kind of a great storyteller for the ages. He was able to collaborate effectively with people to create some great stories. He collaborated effectively with Spielberg on Indiana Jones films. Yeah, you're right. You've kind of hit the nail on the head there, which is that this is clearly something Lucas really wanted to do himself, which is why they're interesting, but also probably why they're flawed as well.
Yeah, so obviously just sitting down and having passion is not, going to guarantee you a good prequel, but it'll at least make you a bad prequel that people will actually talk about rather than a bad prequel that everyone will just shrug at.
Yeah, like Alien Covenant, which is just likely to be forgotten.
Or Hannibal Rising, or Gotham, or, I think, ultimately, Solo, a Star Wars story.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. Whilst you're there, please leave us a review as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio content, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
You can also follow us on the social medias. We are Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook and at MFV Podcast on Twitter. So go ahead, give us a follow and find out all the latest hot show updates, as well as occasionally our thoughts on other pop culture related things. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find out more about me at nickbryan.com, including details of my books, my comics, and I think there's a picture of my face as well, so enjoy that. And you can also follow me at NickMB on Twitter and see the exact same picture of my face, as well as some of my amazing opinions.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we'll be reviewing Matt Groening's new Netflix TV show, Disenchantment. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye. I don't know what to tell you, there just weren't any amusing fuck-ups in the episode. I know, I'm disappointed too.